Now that the formalities are out of the way, we can get stuck into the programme. And for our opening keynote, I'm delighted to introduce Neil Crockett. Neil and I have worked together in Digital Catapult, where he was the founding CEO, and on the Matrix ICT report. Prior to that, Neil worked in Cisco, where, amongst other things, he was managing director for the London Olympics 2012 programme of work. Most recently, Neil was the Chief Digital Officer for Rolls-Royce. Neil's going to talk to us about a different way of looking at digital transformation. Over to you, Neil.
Good morning, and thank you very much, Tom, for the introduction. I'd also like to add my congratulations to the conference organisers for putting on the show in such difficult times. In the next 20 minutes, I'm going to talk to you about digital transformation, but through the lens of digital enthusiasm. As Tom has said to you, I was lucky enough to run Cisco's London 2012 sponsorship. It is beyond doubt the most enjoyable job I had in my career. And it was Cisco's first ever Olympic sponsorship. For me, the Games volunteers were the superstars. It was their enthusiasm to be games makers and inspire a nation that was completely infectious. I don't know if any of you went to the Games, but it was quite amazing to feel that enthusiasm. My job was to use London 2012 to create a similar passion about Cisco. Now, as a major technology company making a huge investment, you can only imagine there was real pressure on me to focus our plans and our spend talking and advocating our amazing Cisco technology. But instead, we went for a different mantra. We wanted to show our colleagues, our customers, our partners, it was not about what we make, but about what we make possible. And for example, most of the money that we spent went on building a huge STEM and digital innovation legacy for East London and the UK. It was successful. I mean, Cisco is now a repeat Olympic sponsor. But it was also my wake-up call that whilst technology is important, it is what it makes possible that lights people's fire, that makes them enthusiastic. I'll start this presentation by saying I believe enthusiasm is the most important word in digital. So let's take a step back. My experience is that we digital technology people are disproportionately passionate about what we do. For a few, it's actually about the technology itself, for itself. And as you see on the left here, here's the things we're going to talk about at Beltec. You're going to have a great time. But for most of you, it's more about what you can make better, what you make possible by applying those technologies. So the reason I'm a trustee at Barnardo's is because I believe that digital innovation has a massive potential to help vulnerable children, and it already has during the COVID-19 crisis. When I was Chief Digital Officer at Rolls-Royce, the project that excited people were those projects about fuel efficiency and environmental performance. Now, the list on the right is just a few examples of things we want to try and make possible. I'm sure you have a lot of amazing positive outcomes that light your fire, and are the reason for you do what you do. And it does look awfully simple, doesn't it? Take the technology, apply it, and make it possible. Oh, sorry, next slide. Sorry, I forgot to go on two slides. I'm on slide 4, I beg your pardon. We're all getting used to the online world. Are we on slide 4? Okay, great. Making this difference to go from technology to what we can make possible, it relies on everyone else in our organization to make it happen across the organization. Now, throughout my technology career, I've heard the everyone else group called a range of names because they have a tendency to delay and frustrate the things that we know we can get done. I've heard them called the porridge fields, the organizational white blood cells, and there's just some of the politer terms I've heard used. And it's really no big surprise that people have these attitudes when you think about it, because they're dealing with their everyday VUCA. They're sort of seeing we're one signal in a very noisy world. And by the way, this everyone else thing applies even to the most centrally mandated enterprise IT system. Indeed, my experience is that the more centrally mandated an IT or digital project is, the more the resistance you get from everyone else. Next slide, please. The issue of everyone else's lack of enthusiasm is the shared elephant in the room. It is the biggest single issue that will accelerate, stop, or delay what you are trying to make possible. So this is why, to me, digital transformation is 10% technology and 90% sociology or psychology. It's about how we make everyone else behave differently. Next slide, please. So today I wanted to share, on slide 6, I wanted to share 6 thoughts on increasing everyone else's digital enthusiasm. Things you can take away and maybe apply or use yourself. So these things are mainly experiences from Rolls-Royce, but also, more importantly, some painful career scar tissue that I've picked up along the way. And what I'm going to say is just normal business acumen and common sense. It's not rocket science. And some of you will see it as relevant to your work and your organization, others won't as much. But my point is, do take time out just to think about digital transformation through this optic. I'd also encourage you as a Beltec community to share your stories so that you can learn together about this aspect of digital transformation. It's a shared challenge, after all, for all of us. Next slide, slide 7, please. So firstly, when I joined Rolls-Royce, Warren East had just joined as CEO. He was in his honeymoon period. Anything he said was fine. And a lot of the digital team, my digital team that I started working with, said, well, if only Warren would tell him it's important, if only Warren would tell him to do it, then it'd be fine. Completely not right, the wrong approach. A central master plan is something I am told. It's not something I feel or which I own. So what we are trying to do here is make games maker type volunteers. We're not trying to get conscripts. So you do, of course, however, still need a higher level direction. You do need some framework to work within. And I just see that a balance of 2 things. First of all, the why. You need a direction that's emotionally tied into what you're trying to make possible. And the what, a guiding framework of what are the priorities that everyone should make a selection from and choose their own mix and own and actually make happen. Next slide, please, slide 8. And this is what we call aligned autonomy. It's an intent-based leadership. It's a form of leadership, and it creates much more local enthusiasm. The graphic shows how different leadership styles approach crossing a river. Now, compare the top left and the top right approaches. And just think, how enthusiastic does each of them, or would each of them, make you feel? By way of example, I just want to give you a brief overview of how we handle this aligned autonomy in a Rolls-Royce digital strategy. First of all, we had to work out the why. So in our framework, we said, why are we doing this? This is the thing we laid out. And luckily enough, as we had a new CEO, we also had a new corporate mission statement. And the mission statement was Rolls-Royce pioneers the power that matters. And digital was identified as one of the 3 strands for this pioneering. But what we wanted to do was to move from having 600 digital pioneers in a separate digital group to having a digital Rolls-Royce with 50,000 active digital pioneers. A truly organizational transformation was why we wanted to do this. The what was easy. I mean, Rolls-Royce has an amazing track record of working with data. I mean, its predictive analytics are amazing. So, give you an example, 97% of the faults that happen in engines are predicted in advance. So, it's pretty obvious that, extending that skill to address many more challenges, that data science and many more challenges around the business became our primary focus. In fact, we actually changed the name of the digital team to R² Data Labs. Third dimension after the why and the what was the where. And we emphasized three priorities, which were corporate priorities in the new plan: incremental cash generation, better customer intimacy, and more actionable insights for the whole product cycle through as operated, as built, as designed. And each business could then choose its priority from that mix. Now, that's not massively feely-touchy, but the main point is it's tied into something which people believe in and which they've bought into as part of a new mission. So then the why, the what, and the where, and then we talked about the how. And the how was really easy. We wanted to decentralize this. We wanted to make sure we created programs where the business units could get as many of their teams involved in proposing relevant business challenges for data innovation sprints. So these are the four dimensions of an aligned autonomy framework. There was no monster launch. There was no big CEO speech. There was no big gesture. Just connecting people in a framework to a corporate vision, and a framework that was designed to decentralize so that everyone else could franchise it and own it. So next slide, please. Secondly, there's a truth that people don't get enthusiastic about things that are not relevant to them. When I joined Rolls-Royce, we had a group in Germany called Power Systems, and a really big part of Rolls-Royce, but they were not engaging with the digital team, and no one could work it out. You know, the guy said, you know, we've got stuff here that predicts 97% of faults and engines before they happen. Why wouldn't people want to talk to us? So I got everyone in a plane, and we went over to Germany. Those are the good old days when you could get into planes, and we went over to Germany, and within the first half an hour, it became really obvious they weren't interested in identifying 97% of the faults before they happened, because 90% of their assets weren't connected. And, you know, it's like a light bulb moment. We weren't relevant. We were talking about something that wasn't relevant to them. So we changed the whole plan, the whole engagement, and actually that started off a whole new relationship, a whole new enthusiasm, if you like, for what we were doing. And of course, I've already described that aligned autonomy approach, and that in itself, by definition, is all based around people finding local projects based on relevant challenges. Another way of increasing relevancy to everyone is by putting skin in the game. When I joined, I nearly made the whole of my team fall off their seats, because I actually made a statement to the business leaders in Rolls-Royce that if they spent money on us, we would return the money in hard currency within a year. We would save more and deliver more in a year than they spent us in that year. So it's a 12-month ROI. And that was really hard. It did stretch us, and it was hard incremental. We're not talking about soft stuff. We're talking hard incremental, extra cash, more profit, real hard stuff. And I insisted that it was signed off by the chief financial officer in each business unit, and that they were the ones who measured it and said it was successful, that it was incremental. And on that basis, that was okay, as long as the CFOs then also took an extra committed business forecast in their own forecasts, so we had mutual skin in the game. Now, that puts enormous pressure, and it's quite short term, but it's relevant. It may be complex and painful, but it's relevant because that's what everyone else is thinking about. And it gets commitment, and it gets enthusiasm, it gets attention. You know, lack of business relevancy is fatal. I don't know about you, but I've come in several times in my career on a Monday morning, all chirpy after a great weekend, to be told that my budget had been cut or taken away completely. Pretty shocking moment. I used to get very angry about it, but then I realized that's not the reason why my budget was cut, surprisingly, was because we hadn't made ourselves relevant enough. You know, budgets, after all, are the way that businesses show their love. And if you're not loved, you're not going to get the budget. So if you've had that, that's what happens. It's a very dangerous game to play not to be relevant. Next slide, please. Thirdly, in terms of enthusiasm, my advice is avoid, or at least minimize, having a separate digital team. Move your digital people in with everyone else, deep into the business, as deep as you can. I mean, there's many ways you can do it. If you do that, it keeps you relevant, it keeps you informed, it keeps you sharp, it keeps you protected, as we talked about with budgets. It's easier to build enthusiasm if you're part of the family. The digital tech bubble can be a really happy place to live, and I've lived there myself. But if you stay in there and don't go out, you'll really struggle to make a real difference. So by way of example, when I started at Rolls-Royce, the digital team was 600 people. Central digital team, 600. When I left Rolls-Royce, it was 50. Now, that wasn't because some people weren't there, but it was because from the very day one, I moved people out into the business units, the best people out into the business units, and some into the IT infrastructure. I helped the business units develop their own parallel chief digital officer franchise and federated franchises. We had a rule which if there was no BU budget, then there was no digital project. If there was no business sponsor, no dedicated subject matter expert for a sprint, then it didn't happen. We had a DevOps approach where you had to have the business, subject matter expert, the digital person, the IT person, everyone in, but the business had to be in the DevOps team from the beginning right the way through. So it can be a painful approach. It's a very painful approach. There's lots of ways you can do it in terms of organizationally, but it's hard to create enthusiasm if you're not seen as part of the family. Next slide, please. Fourthly, complexity puts people off. It just destroys enthusiasm. And as I already said, what we wanted to do was to develop programs that allowed the business or help the business units get lots more of its people or their people involved in business challenges and data innovation sprints. We wanted to go really distributed in our engagement. So what we did to make it easy, we codified a simple agile 12-week sprint model for everyone to use. We embedded experts from the back office right into the front where they could help identify and validate and run sprints. In the first 12 months, we identified about 10 to 15 sprints for business challenges. But within 18 months, we had over 70 sprints. Now, most of those ended up not meeting the requirement of the hypothesis. I'm not going any further. But the point was that enough did meet that hypothesis. And what that did was, as people heard about the stories, it grew belief, it grew enthusiasm. And as we started doing those things, what happened was themes emerged. So we started to cluster sprints around what we called hunts. So things like inventory cycle reduction became a big theme, which we just got several sprints around, our engine fuel efficiency. And then what happened, emerged was even bigger things started to emerge as we got into it and people started to get active and do it. And we had bigger sprint clusters called battles, which wouldn't last weeks or months, but would last maybe years. And that point is that if you take small iterative steps, if you take that approach, it gives everyone else a feeling of discovery, of involved in self-discovery, of the issues being real, of there being a momentum. And that all builds, that approach builds enthusiasm. I've got one of my favorite expressions is 2 nations divided by a common language. And that not just describing our relationship with our American colleagues, but also I think it applies equally to us as a digital tribe with everyone else. You could also, by the way, add the quote, 2 nations divided by different mindsets. And mindset and language differences really cause frustration and they cause digital resistance. It seems petty, but it really trips you up. So whenever I was in Rolls-Royce, I thought a platform was a cloud platform. That's what a platform is. Everyone else in Rolls-Royce thought a platform was an A380 in a cloud. I mean, it was just a complete mismatch in terms of and it did just the number of times it tripped up what we were trying to do and caused frustration. So take time to get a common language and a culture. The little example on the screen is a little tool we used with the business units where we went out and said, look, here's the things that we think in terms of behavior we need to do in these projects. And we tracked in the solid blue against the spider lines where they were an appetite for speed or autonomy or experiment or volume of projects. And then the red line was where we were. And we had a discussion and we developed a signature that was common and we could refer back to. Simple things like that and investing in that really would lay the grounds for enthusiasm. Fifthly, I'm a great believer in the phrase, knowledge gives confidence, gives enthusiasm. And you do need to invest in things that give everyone else the confidence to at least see what's possible. Otherwise, it just goes straight over their head. There's no traction. So I've given some examples on the slide. I'm not going to go into them. I mean, digital academies. I mean, Rolls-Royce, we had a great, fantastic digital academy. Had thousands of people involved in it. And in Bernardo's, we're doing something very similar at the moment, actually, as well. We also had things called chapters, which, if you've got a distributed team, your digital experts are out there and working with everyone, they still need to be fed with skills. So we set up chapters, virtual communities where people got their skills still. We appointed champions. I mean, in Rolls-Royce, I think there were 10, maybe 100 champions around the business who were like the lightning rods for enthusiasm. And in Bernardo's, we got that as well. In Barclays, I think they've got many thousands of digital champions around the organization. They're important, and if they're combined with the experts you're sending out to embed, then they can all include confidence. But you need to work from the very beginning, not just on the technologies, but also on the mindsets, the culture, the agile thinking, the way that digital projects require you to think. Next slide, please, slide 14. Finally, I would say communicate. Don't bullshit. I mean, you don't have to be fluffy, but also don't wait until the very end for a polished outcome. Tell your stories early. Get the peers in the peer group to tell the stories. One thing I learned was that I got very frustrated in Rolls-Royce because everything about digital was like 3 clicks below the sort of internal website, because it wasn't prioritized at the beginning. So I got fed up with that. So what we did is we started to put things out in external social media, just putting on YouTube all the things we were doing. And what we discovered was, amazingly, that whilst we got 200 people watching something internal comms sent out, we got maybe 2,000 or 3,000 people inside Rolls-Royce watching stuff we sent out in external social media. So external social media is a big thing. So think laterally, that's the point. Next slide, please. So there are some indicators that you can spot if you're starting to get this enthusiasm. I thought I'd just share some things with you. And these are things that you might not see initially as good things, but they are good things through the optic and the lens of creating digital enthusiasm. So if you start seeing people developing skunk works in terms of digital skunk works, embrace it, welcome it, go and support them. Don't try and close them down. If you see competing digital teams popping up in the business units, go and work with them, help them, embrace them. Don't look at it through the hygiene lens where that's a bit messy and they should be doing what the corporate line is. Don't destroy enthusiasm, encourage it. If startups start to appear, go and help them, go and bring them in, make sure they have help. If you start seeing external social media posts, don't go to comms and say, close it down. Go and work with them and see if you can make it better. And you start to see things, if the business takes on hard targets, or if you find that your budgets aren't cut during a budget cut, that they aren't cut so much, then you'll know. These are the indicators. Lay the indicators out like you do for everything else to try and spot digital enthusiasm. Next slide, please. So in summary, these are 6 things that I've outlined, which I think can help. Aligned autonomy leadership, staying relevant, bursting your digital bubble, making it easy, communicating, and building their confidence. And remember, it's not about what you make, it's about what you make possible. Next slide, please. Just to finally say, Bill Gates is one of the great technologists of our age, certainly at my age. A lot of you are probably a lot younger. But this is what he said: what I do best is share my enthusiasm. And I would encourage you to take the time to think about maybe the things I've said, but also think about the things that you reflect on yourself in terms of work as well. And think about enthusiasm as an optic for your transformation. Take the time out to do that. And I believe that will help you take that technology you're going to learn about at Beltec and transfer it into those amazing things that you want to make possible and which light your fire. So thank you very much. Next slide. Thank you very much for listening. And I think it's over to the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Neil. That was excellent, very relevant, I guess, even from my mature position. There's a lot there to be learned, I guess, particularly around making sure you're relevant to the business. So Super. Now, I've been trying to just coordinate various channels of feedback and questions. So I suspect we'll have much more than 10 minutes. So happy to do a follow-up session with anybody who's interested. I'd like to just start not with a question, actually, but from a comment that we got on the YouTube channel. So this is from Joanne McLaughlin. Thank you, Joanne. Every single local and central government department manager should hear this presentation on digital enthusiasm. So I think, Neil, you've certainly pushed a few buttons there. So fabulous.
That's good.
Okay, there's a few questions. I guess I'll take curator's privilege and ask one first. Now, this is my own personal hobby horse, as you probably found already. So you mentioned the importance of an aligned digital strategy. Now, I've said a couple of times, and I will continue to say that Northern Ireland, unlike its peers in other regions, doesn't have a digital strategy. So in Rolls-Royce terms, I mean, what did that digital strategy look like? And I guess, what do you think you miss, or what do you risk by not having a digital strategy?
Well, of course, the businesses, I mean, every business is different. You know, some businesses don't like digital big strategies, and other businesses, more traditional ones, tend to. I mean, businesses tend to abhor a vacuum in terms of business strategies. But my view is, I covered it in the slide, Tom, really. And I look back and say, well, maybe, you know, should I have given more of a playbook strategy? But what we did is we tried deliberately to keep it at that aligned autonomy level, which was setting out those four things, you know, the why, the what, the where, and the how. And let that sort of be a framework in which, and we made it easy for people, made that a framework which people could then adopt and work with us and do an interlock. We actually did interlocks with I went around and did interlocks with all the business units. And they developed from that their own version of it, which they felt they owned and franchised. And so I sort of, the way I described it it wasn't much deeper than that. The strategy, it was about data. It was about an organizational transformation. It was about 3 priority sets. Others would be allowed if it was really critical. And it was about decentralizing and really making sure that many more people could get involved. So that sort of was the essence of it. We didn't have a big document. I mean, I remember preparing a strategy for the board, and you know, it felt I had a huge long one. I just cut it right down because if you preach it, people, they don't own it, they don't feel it. They just, you know, they sort of pay tuppence to it. So that was the way we approached it, which I know would be foreign to a lot of people, and it still leaves that feeling of a vacuum. But people have to step into the vacuum and own it. It's really easy to deceive yourself that people are listening and doing, but they're not owning and they're not feeling, and therefore they haven't got enthusiasm. So that was the rationale. I don't know if that helps in any way.
Yep, thank you. Okay, so Neil, you've talked a lot about letting business take control and digital being judged using short-term business metrics. Is there a risk that that's going to lead to a conservative digital approach?
It's something which I'm rolled over in my mind again and again. Yeah. Look, the first thing is, I think it's much more important to be impactful than radical. I mean, I'd like to be both, but of the two, I'd rather be impactful than radical and relevant. And it also depends a lot about your organization, as I said before. Like if I'm sitting in Cisco, if I'm not radical, I'm seen as, you know, you have to be radical. There's so many voices being radical. If you're not radical, if you don't out-radical the radicals, then you're going to struggle. So that's one type of organization. But then most organizations aren't like that. Most organizations are more traditional. They are culturally attuned to being cautious, to being maybe even self-sufficient, to being sort of, you know, wary. Engineering and manufacturing, and Rolls-Royce was certainly, and Joanne mentioned local government. I think that's also an environment where that's true. So I think you've got to be very careful. If you go in totally culturally foreign and misaligned, you're going to scare the bejeebers out of everyone, and you're not going to get much enthusiasm. You're going to alienate people. I think the getting people involved, taking those small steps, letting them see what's possible, building momentum, developing your themes. I think that ends up with very radical thoughts, and because people actually want to change. Funny enough, people actually want to create what's possible, but I think you've got to bring them there. You've got to coach them there. So some of the stuff we end up in, and I know they're doing in Rolls-Royce now, from the work we're doing, is pretty radical. I mean, applying AI algorithms to, engine life problems, is really quite difficult stuff to do. Developing digital twins of whole engines is really difficult stuff to do. So, I think you can become radical. You don't have to start with a radical plan. You bring people to the point where they want and become radical themselves. I don't think, and that's why we were going for 50,000 radical pioneers in Rolls-Royce rather than 600 people in a radical digital group. It's just a completely different type of thinking.
Yep, it certainly makes sense. Okay, what were the most successful projects that I guess were discovered or suggested by the business teams in Rolls-Royce?
Well, as I said, a lot of them weren't successful, and that's fine. Well, no, that's fine. I mean, the old mantra of I never lose, I either win or learn is fine. That's a good mantra. And as long as you're thoughtful and in the way you're taking risk and you're learning as you go. And by the way, I've obviously got to be confidential because there's a lot of stuff that is Rolls-Royce proprietary in terms of what they do. But the sort of things that were coming up were ideas about, I think I mentioned fuel efficiency. We set up a co-creation lab with some customers and actually worked with the customers to pull data from all over the place to work on fuel efficiency. That was an environmental impact. That actually made a huge difference in terms of fuel consumption for the airlines involved and therefore the planet. There's a lot of stuff around fleet planning and using data insights and patterns to predict where fleets and trying to manage fleet changes, which all seems nitty gritty, but actually ends up picking up quite a lot of pound notes very quickly for the business. A lot around inventory planning and trying to think about new ways of planning our inventory, including the whole way through the factory. And a lot of this is joining up data streams and bringing in lots of data that was around the problem to get new insights. But I mean, one of the ones that I remember was, it's not sexy, but, was we used natural processing language. We actually put, Rolls-Royce had bespoke contracts. So you put the contracts in a big project and you start to look through NLP for contract triggers that you should be looking at suppliers, which you miss, things you miss because the contracts are so complex, and presenting that as an assist to the people in that department. They used to use lots and lots of time and missed a lot of stuff. And using AI machine learning, we helped them through understanding the complexity of that and actually having insights they get action that created real value. So, ranging from the inspiring environmental impact to the less inspiring but equally valuable, managing of contracts. There's a whole range of stuff.
Okay, thanks, Neil. We're probably going to have to wrap up in a second, so I guess just one final one, unless something else slips in. Again, this is going back to Joanne's comment about public sector. So you've had experience working with the public sector, both in Digital Catapult, but also in some of your previous organizations where you were responsible for the public sector. How would you put some of your key insights, I guess, into the context of the public sector, or given what you know about some of the challenges everybody faces now, are there any ideas or recommendations you'd make to Northern Ireland?
By the way, you're right. In these difficult times, we're all being stretched to think about new ways. When you and I were in the Matrix panel, I mean, I do agree with your point about the joined up thinking and plan. What would I think in terms of local government, I think relevancy is really important. and I think in terms of anything in the public sector, relevancy is important. The truth is that you have to stay relevant to what the plan is, the current plan is, for the people who are actually running government or running the public sector. And I think it's very important that you adapt, that you have, again, this aligned autonomy, that you adapt things that as you go along, so that you can see in advance. I mean, the most times I had budget cut, or surprisingly, was in the public sector days. And that's because you have to be very current with what is going on in terms of the wider environment around you. So, I mean, it's one of the things I would say about working in public sector and local government is you do need to make sure you're keeping what you're saying relevant to the things that are actually what is trying to be achieved right now. I think that's more difficult in local government. And I think you've also got to get your currency of success. It's something I talk about in Bernardo's quite a lot. And in local government, it's difficult. And you go to a meeting in Cisco or Rolls-Royce, shareholder value, it's easy. Everyone wants shareholder value. Any argument is solved, won or lost, depending on does it create shareholder value. That's the trump card. I think it's sometimes a bit more fuzzy in local government, the public sector, and certainly the charity sector. So I think working out what your currency of success is and making sure you stay aligned to that currency of success is very difficult. And there's lots of, when you go public sector and you go wider than the corporate, you do find lots more stimuli saying, do this, do that, do the other. And I think you've got to be quite disciplined about staying with your eye on the ball of what's relevant and what the currency of success is. I don't know if that answers your question, Tom.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question, or did I miss it?
No, I think that covers it pretty well. You've got a final slide and I guess a request for some assistance or some inspiration.
If we just have the final slide, please. Is it up?
Yep. Okay,
thank you very much. So Tom and I were thinking about this, and I think I mentioned earlier on, I think this is something, this optic, this way of looking, this way of thinking, it may not be a big part of your life, but I think you should do some of it. And although I do think it should be a big part of your life. But we're going to ask you if you wouldn't mind and to just maybe take part and get involved. And I've taken the risk of putting my email address on. I think it's on my LinkedIn address anyway, so it's not a big risk. But if you could send to me by tomorrow, and no more than 100 words, please. I mean, just try and really condense it down. An example, a specific example of how you have been successful in creating enthusiasm in your organization for what digital is doing. And if you just focus on the what, the why, what the result was, and what any lesson learned, maybe one lesson learned from it. And we will be offering a prize, Tom and I, for the best 3 insightful, impactful stories that are given to us. Tom and I are the judges, and we'll actually announce that on Thursday, Tom, I think.
Yep.
And then what we'll do is we'll curate all those inputs. And we'll make sure everyone who's input gets back the whole list of all the stories. So, this is part of being a community. It's part of the benefit of being online. We do miss those chats around the coffee machine. This is a way of doing it in a different way.
Okay. Thank you very much.